The banned monad techniques revealed direct divine access without priest sovereignty. Archons cannot. Jesus' left-hand path revealed ancient power techniques the Church suppressed for 2,000 years. Everything you learned about Jesus was carefully edited. The gentle, submissive figure religion painted over centuries is only half the story. There exists a set of teachings so revolutionary they were completely erased from official sacred texts. Practices so powerful they threaten the entire power structure of the emerging church. I'm talking about the left-hand path, secret techniques of monadic activation that Jesus actually taught his closest disciples. This has nothing to do with the distorted occultism they want you to believe. It's about something far more radical, awakening the divine spark within you without needing priests, elaborate rituals, or religious institutions telling you what you can or cannot experience spiritually. The term left-hand path carries cultural weight that must be deconstructed. For centuries, the left was associated with sinister, profane, diabolic. The right represented sacred and correct. This binary dichotomy served perfectly the control purposes of religious institutions. They needed to label as dangerous any teaching that threatened their authority. The true left-hand path has absolutely nothing to do with evil worship or destructive practices. It's actually a direct approach to spiritual illumination that places the practitioner at the center of their own evolutionary journey. It's about sovereign your monad, the divine core dwelling within you since before time began, without depending on priests, elaborate rituals, or rigid dogmas. The Gnostic manuscripts discovered at Nag Hammadi, Egypt in 1945 revealed texts excluded from the official Bible, precisely because they contradicted the power narrative of the nascent church. These writings show a completely different Jesus. The Initiatic master teaching practical techniques of inner awakening. He spoke about direct knowledge of the divine, Gnosis as the only true path to liberation, not blind faith or external submission, but personal experimentation and radical transformation of consciousness. When Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is within you, he referred directly to this monadic presence that remains dormant in most human beings throughout entire existence. Institutionalized religion created elaborate mediation systems between you and this internal divine essence. Priests became exclusive guardians of the sacred. Sacraments transformed into mandatory gates for grace. Rigid dogmas established what you could or couldn't experience spiritually. This control structure guaranteed spiritual power remained centralized in few hands, while Masseuse depended eternally on external authorities to validate their interior experiences. Jesus' left-hand path represented complete subversion of this hierarchical model, because he taught each individual possesses direct and immediate access to the divine through conscious activation of their own monad. Monad activation techniques. To truly understand monadic activation, we must first grasp the concept of monad within ancestral spiritual cosmology. The monad represents the original divine spark, that particle of pure consciousness fragmenting from the universal source to begin the journey of individualization through dense planes of matter. It's not simply your soul or spirit in the conventional sense these words carry, but rather your true eternal self prior to any physical incarnation or temporal identity. The forbidden monadic activation techniques include deep meditation practices, dissolving the illusory layers of ego-conditioned identity. Jesus taught specific conscious breathing exercises, altering brainwave patterns, allowing access to expanded states of consciousness where the monad could be directly perceived and integrated. He used guided visualizations mapping internal spiritual anatomy, showing disciples how to navigate energetic portals connecting different subtle bodies. These practices were transmitted orally, reserved only for those demonstrating genuine commitment to radical transformation of their being. Another fundamental aspect was working with internal polarities. Jesus understood profoundly that unifying opposing forces within human psyche creates necessary alchemical conditions for the monad to fully awaken. Sacred masculine and feminine, light and shadow, active and receptive. He didn't preach suppression of aspects considered negative or dark, but rather their conscious integration through radical love and transformative acceptance. This was the true spiritual transmutation frightening guardians of religious orthodoxy. The word gnosis comes from ancient Greek meaning direct knowledge. Not that intellectual knowledge you accumulate through books or lectures, but the experiential wisdom arising when you directly touch ultimate reality of things. Gnostics understood spiritual liberation didn't come through belief in external doctrines, however elaborate they were, but through personal and undeniable experience of divine truth. Jesus, as Gnostic master, offered concrete practices, allowing his followers to experience for themselves what he described. Instead of simply accepting his words as unquestionable articles of faith, the Gnostic system presented a radical cosmology where the material world was seen as a prison, created by forces desiring to keep divine sparks trapped in ignorance and suffering. This vision may seem pessimistic at first glance, but was actually profoundly liberating because it placed transformation responsibility directly in the practitioner's hands. You didn't need to wait for external saviors or final judgment in some distant future. Liberation was available here and now. Through conscious awakening of your dormant monad, Jesus taught recognizing the illusory nature of external control structures was the essential first. Step 2. True spiritual freedom. Spiritual sovereignty means assuming total responsibility for your own consciousness even without delegating this sacred power to any external authority, whether religious, governmental, or social. This doesn't imply arrogance or disconnection from collective wisdom, but rather sufficient spiritual maturity to discern internally what resonates as truth for you. In each moment of your unique journey, the left-hand path cultivated this radical autonomy through practices strengthening direct connection between individual consciousness and universal source, making obsolete all intermediary structures positioning themselves as mandatory guardians of the sacred. Jesus constantly challenged religious authorities of his time, precisely because he taught this spiritual sovereignty to common people. When he healed on the Sabbath, touched lepers considered impure, or spoke openly with women and social outcasts, he was demonstrating practically that external rules imposed by control systems possessed no real power over those who awakened their internal monadic connection. Each act of conscious disobedience to oppressive structures was a living lesson about authentic spiritual freedom, showing that true sacred completely transcends all dualistic categories of pure and impure, permitted and forbidden, that religious systems use to keep people imprisoned in fear and guilt. When Jesus stated you could do even greater things than he did, it wasn't false modesty or poetic figure of speech. It was a literal declaration about the latent monadic potential in each human being, waiting only for conscious activation to manifest powers that conditioned mind considers impossible, or reserved only for special saints and avatars. Monadic activation completely dismantles the artificial spiritual hierarchy that places some beings on unattainable pedestals while keeping the majority in positions of eternal dependent learners. For those truly interested in deepening understanding of these ancestral techniques and discovering how to apply them in your own spiritual awakening journey, I've left complementary material in the pinned comments. This isn't about consuming more theory, but accessing practical tools that genuinely work when you commit to daily consistent practice. Real transformation requires more than passing curiosity. It demands dedication and courage to question everything you've always accepted as absolute truth. You are, in your deepest essence, an individualized expression of the same divine source that animated Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, and all great masters of human history. The difference is not in essence, but in awareness, in conscious activation of what already exists within you, since, always, personal power development through monadic activation had nothing to do with domination over others or egoic manipulation of external circumstances. It was about the power to remain centered in your interior truth, regardless of external pressures, the power to manifest your reality aligned with higher purposes, the power to heal and transform through conscious presence connected to Source. Jesus demonstrated these powers constantly, but always emphasized they emerged naturally from internal divine connection, not from some personal exceptionality separating him from others. He came precisely to show the path of return to remembering who we really are, beyond the temporary masks of conditioned personality. The journey of integrating these practices into your daily life requires much more than intellectual understanding or passing initial enthusiasm. It demands genuine commitment to consistent practice, even when results aren't immediately visible, or when internal resistance manifests with full force. Your conditioned ego, that psychological structure built over years of social programming and unprocessed traumas, naturally resists any process threatening to dissolve it. In the light of awakened monadic consciousness, this resistance isn't a sign of failure, but rather confirmation you're touching deep layers that genuinely need transformation for authentic liberation to happen. Gnostic techniques also included sacred use of entheogenic substances, temporarily expanding perception beyond limits of conditioned ego. Although this aspect is controversial and was completely erased from official narrative, historical and anthropological evidence strongly suggests many ancient mystical traditions used sacred plants, including certain currents of early Christianity, as tools to facilitate direct experiences of the divine. This doesn't mean recreational or irresponsible use, but rather carefully structured ritual employment within appropriate spiritual contexts, always under guidance of experienced masters who knew how to navigate these altered states of consciousness with safety and clear purpose. The development of discernment becomes crucial on this path, because not every spiritual experience comes from the monad. Archonic forces can mimic divine experiences to keep seekers trapped in spiritual bypassing, avoiding real shadow work and authentic transformation. True monadic activation produces specific fruits: increased compassion without enabling dysfunction, clarity without judgment, power without control over others. When these characteristics aren't present, the experience likely originated from egoic inflation or archontic interference. Jesus taught his closest disciples how to distinguish genuine divine connection from counterfeit spiritual experiences. This discernment training was an essential part of the left-hand path. Jesus defied religious authorities precisely because he taught sovereignty to ordinary people. Each miracle was a demonstration that divine power wasn't reserved for special intermediaries. When he said you are gods, he meant it literally, not metaphorically. You carry the same creative potential as the source itself. The only difference is awareness and activation. The practices he taught in secret to prepare disciples weren't complex, but they required radical honesty with yourself, daily commitment to dissolving illusions you built to feel safe in the archontic matrix. This path isn't comfortable. It demands you face everything you've been avoiding, every shadow you've projected onto others, every limiting belief you've cherished as identity. But the freedom on the other side of this work is beyond anything institutionalized religion promises in distant afterlife. It's available now, in this lifetime, through practices Jesus actually taught before the church erased them. The integration of polarities within your psyche creates the alchemical conditions for monad awakening. You cannot transcend what you haven't integrated. This is why suppression of shadow aspects never works. They just gain power in unconscious realms, sabotaging your conscious intentions. Jesus taught embrace of the totality of human experience, not denial of aspects deemed unacceptable by social conditioning. Through this radical acceptance, transformation happens naturally, without the violence of forced spiritual bypassing that characterizes so much of modern spirituality. Your monad doesn't need to be created or earned. It already exists, fully formed, waiting only for your recognition. The practices clear away the debris of conditioning obscuring your natural divine state, like removing dust from a mirror that was always reflective underneath. This is why Jesus emphasized gnosis over faith, direct experience over belief, because once you've touched your own divine nature, no external authority can convince you otherwise. The Church knew this, which is why they systematically destroyed these teachings and murdered those who practiced them openly. The Cathars, the Gnostics, countless mystical movements throughout history eliminated precisely because they threatened centralized spiritual control. But truth cannot be permanently suppressed. It resurfaces in every generation through those courageous enough to seek beyond official narratives. You are part of this lineage now, whether you recognize it yet or not. The fact you're watching this video resonating with these concepts means your monad is calling you home. Answer that call. Not tomorrow, not when conditions are perfect, but now. Tonight. With the next breath you take, For those desiring deeper exploration of historical and philosophical sources of these teachings, I strongly recommend studying the Gnostic Gospels of Nag Hammadi, particularly the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Philip, which preserve teachings much closer to Jesus' original words. Elaine Pagels' work, especially the Gnostic Gospels and Beyond Belief, offers rigorous and accessible academic analysis of how early Christianity was far more diverse and radical than official versions later permitted. These essential texts are linked in the description below. They're not just historical documents, but activation manuals for awakened consciousness. Read them after practicing the techniques for several days. The texts will reveal layers of meaning your elevated state can now perceive. If this content resonated deeply with something within you, if it ignited that spark of recognition indicating you're touching essential truths for your particular journey, please share this video with others also seeking authentic paths of spiritual awakening. Subscribe to Divine Light Academy and activate notifications so you don't miss upcoming content where we'll continue exploring these hidden wisdom traditions preserved in shadows precisely to survive centuries of persecution and suppression. Leave in the comments your reflections, your personal experiences with these practices, because honest exchange between sincere seekers immensely enriches everyone's journey. Remember, always, true spiritual knowledge isn't accumulated as intellectual possession, but lived as experiential transformation that completely reconstructs who you are. Until our next encounter, may the light of your monad awaken and illuminate each step of your unique path.